Hey everybody, Sean from Sean Solo Sabers here. First and foremost, I really want to thank you for being a customer of mine. 2021 was a massive year. My wife and I had a baby, and I committed to this business full time. So this is what I do for a living, literally, and I really couldn't do it without you. So I just want to reassure you, this video is to show you a couple things about the Sabers, and I'm going to explain mostly how to reset the Saber if anything strange is happening, or if there's something happening on the blade or not happening, like recharging, etc. I'm going to cover a lot of different topics, and hopefully I've added bookmarks to the YouTube version so that you can just skip to whatever part of this that you need to. I'm going to go through a lot of different of the Sabers. I'm not going to get to every single one, but eventually I will. I'm just going in order of volume. So these are the three that I sell the most of. So I'm trying to help as many people as easily as possible. So again, thank you for your purchase. If you've purchased within the last year, if it's been less than a year, if you've just received your Saber and something you believe strange is happening or you feel like it's broken, again, I want to reassure you, you have a 1-year warranty, and I'm here to take care of all of my customers. 9 times out of 10, it's just popping the battery out and putting it back in. So I'm going to cover, first of all, how to recharge your Saber. I'm going to cover how to reset the battery, and then I'm going to cover some other FAQ items and just some general guidelines to help your Saber last as long as possible. And again, thank you so much for your purchase. I do appreciate it. I'm here for you. Feel free to ask me any questions as they come up, okay? But hopefully this will probably satisfy 90 to 95% of any questions that could potentially come up. All right, so let's walk through just how to charge the Sabers first of all. And I definitely recommend it once you first receive it. So in general, there's kind of 3 different types. There's more than 3 types, but in general, there's 3. There's one that has the exposed recharge port right here. That's a 2.1 recharge port, 2.1 millimeter that is. There's this style, which is Luke's Return of the Jedi version, also Obi Wan, that has an exposed recharge port that's USB-C as you twist the bottom off here. Obi-Wan's going to look a little bit different, but you're going to see this recharge port right there, okay? And then the third type is kind of, well, there's, again, like I said, there's a lot of them. On the more economical Sabers, it's usually exposed, just like the one with Kylo Ren, or sorry, not Kylo Ren, Darth Maul. And so you usually see, the Sabers that are around $300, you usually see the recharge port, and it's pretty straightforward. So there's that style. And then there's the Graflex style, and this would be the Anakin episode 3, the Luke episode 7, and the Rey episode 9, and then Darth Vader's episode 4, episode 5. And so all of them will kind of act as follows. You have a clamp card here, and in fact, Luke's Return of the Jedi, it acts the same way. Underneath this clamp card, there's a button, and that's how you activate the Saber. So that's power on and off. And in order to recharge these Sabers, you actually just need to pop the battery out. So I would say it's probably the least convenient, but it gives you that as close to movie style as possible. I mean, it's pretty close. It's one of my favorites for sure. So the first thing to do on this style is to unscrew the handle bit right there. But if you find that it's stiff or difficult, what you can do is slide this card down, and it might be a little difficult at first because there's a little bit of like glue roughly right here that you can always replace if you need to. And this one's missing. There's usually a little screw right here, so I took it out just for ease of the video. So what you would do if this is difficult to unscrew, you just need to loosen this screw right here a little bit, and that will unclamp, so to speak, the clamp here. And then you're just going to grab and twist. By the way, I'm wearing a ring right now. It's really a bad idea, especially with chrome. So just be careful when you're handling these Sabers that any metal can potentially scratch it. And I just want you to keep your Saber as nice for as long as possible. So you unscrew this part. There's actually a shroud covering the electronics. You're just going to unscrew this. This can be a little bit tight, but it just comes off eventually like this. And again, this is how to recharge the Saber, but in this case, this is actually how to reset the Saber as well. Whoops. So this battery just kind of falls out if this is loose enough. So this would be the way actually to take this clamp piece off. And you would want to do that if you want to get this battery out. So normally the battery is in here like that, and they can be a little bit snug. I understand, I'm getting a lot of feedback on that. For now, unfortunately, that's just kind of the way they are. There's a new different battery terminal style that holds the battery in better. One of the things I'm going to show you actually is how to adjust these battery terminals, because you do need a lot of actually pressure to get good contact with the battery. Now I'm going to do something that might freak you out. I'm actually going to tip this over and show you the best way. This is XENOPIXEL, by the way. The best way to get this battery out, and it's actually bending the chassis a little bit, and I'm going to use the table to do it. And all you do really is you give a little bit of tap, or pressure rather, down at the bottom right here, and it's going to seem like you really shouldn't, but that's actually the easiest way. And all you're doing is flexing this plastic chassis a little bit. It's not really damaging anything. It's just giving the chassis a little bit of flex to pop that battery out, and it should come right out. So in this style of Saber, what you're going to do is you're going to plug this battery charger into any 5-volt, 1-amp source. That's the ideal. That's really what these chargers are made for. It's going to take a little bit longer than a 2-amp source, but it's going to mean that you're not going to damage the charger, and you're not going to damage the battery. The battery technically could be charged on a 2-amp source. So what you're going to do is you're going to take that little plug that you're going to plug it into, and you're going to flip it over and just read the output settings. It should say 5-volt, 1-amp or something like that. Off the top of my head, I know a older iPhone brick acts that way, the small square cube looking ones. The bigger ones are definitely higher amps, so just be careful with that. Now with any of these Sabers, if you take the battery out, you always want to make sure that you match the polarities, meaning positive to positive, negative to negative. It's not only possible for the Saber not to work, in fact, I can guarantee you it won't work if the battery is plugged into it, let's say, negative to positive. It just won't work. This is correct, positive to positive. This is incorrect, negative to positive. And there should be pretty clear markings on the chassis somewhere to show you this. Usually they're on the inside. It should at least give you one polarity. And of course, I'm struggling to find it. So if it doesn't, apologies for that. It should have some polarity somewhere. Usually it's right inside that little piece right there. It has a little plus. All you have to remember is the button top, the positive part, always goes toward where the blade goes in. So always goes toward where those gold pins are that send data and power to the blade. So again, negative is the flat part. That goes toward the speaker. Positive goes toward where the blade goes in. Once your battery is charged, you just pop it in here, and these chargers will be red, and then they'll turn green once finished. Roughly, it's going to take about 4 hours to charge the battery. Batteries will last anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and change, depending on the use and the color of your blade. Actually, the white blade is the most power hungry, so to speak. So once you have the battery back in, this is again the Graflex style, you're going to, again, it can take a little bit of force, twist the shroud back on. At this point, now you would put the clamp back on, and I would recommend dropping this little button back in here first so you can move the clamp around so that the button drops in as it should. And it should roughly be about that. Then you're going to you're going to put this part first, because you want the clamp to be loose enough for you to be able to fully tighten the handle. All right, so that's tight. Then you're going to put this screw back in. Now on any of these screws, you don't want to over tighten, because you risk stripping either the screw, or worst would be stripping where the screw goes into the hilt itself. So definitely be careful. You want to tighten it, but don't over tighten it. Now on this one, you're going to kind of press the the button down a little bit to slide the clamp.
Power on.
forward.
You're hard to get rid of.
Now, there can be other quirks, unfortunately, with this style. And by the way, it won't be so loose when you do it because you will have put this screw back in. Sometimes the button is not tall enough. Sometimes it's too tall. So let me just show you exactly what's going on here. If what I'm talking about is if you slide this clamp card on, hear how it's already active and this is not active. It can take a little bit of readjusting in order to get this button and clamp to work. So again, loosen this. If you're having this issue, you're going to take this back off, pop the button out, and then you can see actually what's going on here. Within the chassis, there's a power button. You can see that red ring around it. So essentially, it's the same as what's going on here. It's just not fully exposed. So in order to adjust this, you'll remove any screw that's holding the chassis in. And again, being careful because this is going into plastic. And you might have a tool with your Saber that looks like the one I'm using now. You might have ones that look like that. Typically, if your Saber came with a case, with a hard case, you'll have this tool that I'm using. But either way, it's the same size as the silver Allen key that you see there. Now with that screw removed, and if there's one there, take it out for sure. And there shouldn't be one there because that's where the other screw goes in. Here's what you'll see. You'll see a chassis. And God forbid, if anything ever happens to your electronics and it's unrepairable for whatever reason, this is what would be sent to you, assuming that you're in your 1-year warranty still. And this would be the replacement. So what I'm experiencing is the button is too tall. So what I need to do is, there usually won't be these screws on yours, but if there are, you're going to just loosen them so that this button will fall deeper into the chassis. Now the opposite, if you're pressing the button and nothing's happening, I was pressing the button and it was already pressed. So I know that I need a little bit more room here. If the opposite is happening to you, then the fix would be to raise it. So you're going to either tighten screws here, and there is actually a way to put a small set screw where this sits in. It's going to look like that. You can actually put a small set screw in the back here that should come with your Saber, and you'll tighten it down, and that will adjust how far the button is, how close it is rather to the opening here. I apologize in advance. I know this is really finicky, and this should be pre-adjusted already as it comes to you. The truth is sometimes it's not. Usually it is. But if you're having this trouble, there's a couple different ways to adjust the height of the battery. So I've adjusted that, and it may need more adjusting, but let's just pretend that all the adjusting has been finished. Now I'm going to put the screw back in that held the chassis in place. And again, you don't want to over tighten this because it's a metal screw going into plastic. Okay, now the chassis is being held in there. Right, put your shroud back on. Put your clamp on. You always want to put your clamp on before the handle, but just not tightening the clamp, because you can't get the clamp back on because of the grips here. And then again, you're going to have that screw once you pop your button back down into place. Looks like that worked. Cool. So nice first shot, not bad. Do remember, of course, to tighten your clamp down. That will hold everything in place, and then you're going to push this forward. If the glue or the sticky part gets removed from here, you can see it. It's just there on the bottom. And by the way, that's normal. There shouldn't be a button there. There are two others in your small plastic bag that looks like this. You can see them right there. You can replace those small sticky parts. Okay. Darth Maul. A couple things about this. So you're going to plug it in to charge like normal. I actually have a charging cable all ready to go. And so this is the normal charging behavior that you'll see.
Charging.
Okay, so that light should come on and start to kind of pulse, and it will say charging. Once it's done, again, after about 4 hours, that should be solid, and or it'll say done charging, etc. If none of that happens, no worries. Just remove the cable, turn it on. If you believe it's not charging, here's how to reset the battery on this particular Saber. So you have two screws back here. What you're going to do is remove these. This one is pushing the button and the charging port forward. So just like I showed you on the Graflex, you just remove it. And this is there because what you'll need to do to get this chassis out is you'll actually need to press this button down so that it clears. And I'll show you that in just a second. So this is the screw that's holding the chassis in place. Untightening, tightening, just always be careful with how much force. It has happened in the past where the screw has stripped, even taking it out. Again, if it's under warranty, I'm happy to help, but easiest just to completely avoid that. So these two screws are out. The next part is to actually unscrew this piece. It's three pieces. It's the first is the top here. The second is kind of this outer piece. And the third, you can see where the retention screw goes for the blade. That's the piece that's in the middle. So top, second piece, and then third piece, just kind of unscrew like that. All right. Quick tip, by the way, if you're unscrewing this piece, make sure the retention screws are out. Usually this work is happening when you've been using it and then either something happens or you need to reset the battery. So now you can push this part down. Do you see what I mean? It's going like inside the Saber. And that means you can actually pull it out through the top. And if you're having trouble, it's usually that little metal bezel. There you go. So it's totally in there, and you'll see a little bit of plastic, and pop it all the way through. This way is usually the easiest. It kind of fights you a little bit, but that should be everything that's holding it in place. Okay. So again, the same thing, if you're going to reset the battery with this, is you're just going to give it a couple quick taps, maybe one, and the battery comes out. There you go. So again, if you're plugging it in, it's not charging, nothing is happening on the power button, pop the battery out, pop it back in. You're not going to hear anything, but you can actually demo it without putting it back into the Saber. You're just going to press and hold, and that's what you're looking for, power on. There you go. And long press to turn the Saber off.
You're hard to get rid of.
It's going to switch to the next font first, and then once the red light goes off, that means the Saber is off. Okay. And let's say you're plugging your Saber in, it's not saying charging. Again, with the chassis out, you could just plug it in.
Charging.
Charging, right? So that's normal behavior. So it should say charging on the XENOPIXEL style. Okay. Now putting it back in, it's just the exact opposite. You're going to drop it through the top here. And again, it might be a tight squeeze because of the battery and all the electronics. You can give it, make sure it's fully seated in. And if you need to, just give it a little bit of twisting. And you don't want to put too much pressure on these gold pins, so you always want to push down with the plastic chassis itself. And what you're looking for is to line up the power button and the recharge port just like that. So they're still beneath the Saber, but they're lined up. And remember, we're going to push those two back out with this top one here. So you're just going to reverse the order, twist this back on. This part goes counterintuitively. It goes like this with the taper down toward the front. And by the way, if your retention screw holes are covered by this, now you know how to move it. This just moves freely. You just pop this part off, realign so that you make sure your retention screw holes are visible, and then tighten down the top part like that. Make sure they're still visible. You have one there and you have one there. Okay, last part. You're going to push this guy back in, and I usually do as much as I can by hand because it's usually the fastest. And again, making sure you're not tightening too much, but you see the power button and the recharge port are popping back up here. And really all you need to do is make sure it's not sticking out so you don't mash your hand on it. And I'm starting to feel some resistance, so I'll stop, right? Now you see how the power button's kind of up? You can actually control how far up that is. You just back this out. So for my preference, I like it a little bit more flush. There you go, right? So long as this retention screw is not going to cut you. Now, do you see this is a wood screw, meaning it has wood threads and it's sharp, and it's going into plastic. So this is what holds the chassis in place so that when you put your blade in the top, it doesn't push all the way through. What I'm trying to say is this one can strip quite easily and doesn't need to be in there super tight. It'll hold itself really well. So that was about half a turn past where I started to feel resistance. It was about half a turn. So just be careful with that. This one is, I would say, the most difficult, but with a little bit of patience, it should be no issue. So to reset the Saber, let's say you're plugging it in with your USB-C and you're not seeing any lights light up at all here. There should be a red light, a green light. You might see red and green flashing. So what you would want to do, again, it's the same as the Graflex. It's just got a little bit of glue at the bottom there. You're going to slide this off, and it's very similar. You see the power button and you see the retention screw here. This clamp is actually just on there, meaning if you back out this screw, you don't even have to take it all the way out. You do want to make sure that the power button falls out though. And this one might be in there a little bit more than the Graflex. This will kind of move freely, and then it just slides off. Again, be careful not to force it too much because you have chrome pieces here and it might scratch. So there's your power button, that's the inner chassis, and this is the screw that's holding that in place. Now, there are wires going through this thin neck portion that connect the emitter piece to the chassis itself. The chassis itself kind of lives in this thicker part here. You can see it right there. What I'm trying to say is, if you back this screw out, the chassis will fall out the bottom, but it's still connected to the top. So just be careful not to pull too hard. And we'll take this screw out. And again, this is a wood screw, and I could feel it's already stripped in there. So this is my demo version. I've just done it too many times. It's not the end of the world if it strips. It really just needs to kind of hold in place there. But again, in order for it not to strip, just be careful of how much pressure you're applying here. This is a version I used to sell. This is a Profi board version, but it's the same exact way. So I'm noticing right here is a little bit of resistance pulling out. So you should be able to expose the battery fully. But again, it's still connected in there. So you're going to do the same exact thing that I've showed you before. I know it seems a little freaky, but holding the chassis with these two fingers, you're just going to kind of flex the chassis this way so that the battery pops out, and that's it. Everything's fine. So again, this is just to reset this style. Your battery pops out, you can pop it back in. Let me show you though how to adjust, and this is kind of the older style. So you may only have one of these style connectors. Right now there's kind of a circle style here, but if you're having issues where the Saber's working fine and then it's just shutting off for no reason, usually it's within kind of activating the flash on clash. When you're hitting it, it's just turning off. It's possible that these terminals need to be popped out. So you're just going to grab your Allen key. You're going to put it in between the chassis and the metal part. And literally, you're just going to flex it out. Just like that. It's just metal, and you're not going to damage anything because there's no battery in here right now. There's no power right now. So don't worry about like shorting anything. But you're just going to flex these out a little bit, not too much, right? Because it's potentially going to damage that. But what you're doing is you're going to cause more force. The two metal pieces are going to hold the battery in better. And it's possible that what's happening is that the battery is just losing connection with the chassis for a split second when it hits, and it's shutting everything down. That or the overcharge protection is happening on the battery itself, and the Saber just needs to be reset. Take the battery out, pop it back in. So if you're experiencing that kind of sudden off, that is usually how to fix it. Okay, so the idea here is to reline up that power button with the hole. And also you're going to line up, you can see it better in person, but you're going to line that screw hole up. I have this small wood screw again. Yeah, this is just sliding right in. So I'm just going to turn it until some force there happens and it's not coming out the other side. So that's all it needs to do. It just needs to hold this in place. Okay. At this point, I'm going to slide the clamp back on. And this clamp is actually just held. You can see that little mark right there. It's just a pressure retention screw. But before pushing that down, I'm looking for the power button here. There we go. Drop this power button in here first so you can kind of align it properly. Like, meaning so that it just works. There's no specific perfect alignment. It's just, it needs to fall into that hole. If you're finding that it's too tall or it's not tall enough, just loosen this screw again and kind of jiggle this around so it reseats itself. And this battery is pretty dead. I haven't charged it in a while, so it's not going to turn on. But that would be the easiest way to kind of fix that problem. If you're finding on any of these Sabers, especially on the Graflex, that you just can't get the button down far enough, and it's not over-activating, meaning when you put this clamp card back on, nothing is happening, and you're pressing it and nothing's happening, but you know that inside it works because you can just pop this button out and use a tool in there to press the button. And if the Saber's working, it means the button isn't going down far enough. I know how this is going to sound, and this is a fix that it really works. The first way is to, like I showed you, bring that button further back up. Another really easy way is to just drop a little piece of folded over tape. And I found that if you fold a small piece of tape twice, meaning it's 4 layers thick, with this little button out, you just drop it down, put the button back in, and then slide this clamp card forward. Usually, that's, in my experience, a perfect fix. I have had comments where, you know, I spent $500 on a Saber, why am I dropping tape in the hole? Trust me, I get it. I'm just trying to make sure that the Saber acts how it should act as often as possible so that you have the best possible experience. Okay? So back to Return of the Jedi. You're just going to slide that forward, and again, if you need to, you can put double-sided tape at the bottom here, but just apply some pressure once you slide it forward, and it should be fine. It shouldn't slide anywhere. Then you're going to retwist. Make sure this D-ring is up when you twist this back on, because otherwise you can just make a nice scratch mark in your Saber. I don't want that to happen, so just be careful here. You might have to press up this way as you twist to get that first thread started, and then you're going to twist all the way on. Okay, there you go. So those are kind of the 3 most popular Sabers. Let me show you Kylo Ren. Kylo Ren, when you first charge it, well, first of all, in order to make sure that this is aligned, you're going to see in your small bag that comes with yours a couple small rings. They're metal rings, and they're going to go right here. So let me show you how to do that. This wire comes out of this little hole here. And if you're saying to yourself, man, there's a better way to do that, I agree with you. And I've been thinking about this for a while, and I think the best way to do it is if you actually figure out where this hides itself in the connector, and then actually just cut it off. What you would do is you'd put a little bit of glue in this little hole right here, put the top piece in so that the top piece is just always in there, and then just leave the bottom piece kind of loose so that all you'll do is just pop that bottom piece out a little bit, and you won't have to, like, you know, do all that stuff. So I'm admitting that these Sabers don't always arrive in perfect, it's not even condition, it's just a perfect, like, satisfactory way of using them, I guess would be the best way to say that. And so you can see that there's metal rings here. So what you do with these metal rings is you're going to slide, just start with one, slide it all the way down so it's hidden. It's going to hide itself anyway because this handle is going to push it forward. And then you're going to thread the handle back on, and then just see, does that make it look correct or not? Meaning the gold piece should be up front. This red cable should be running kind of in line already with this silver piece here. Does that look good? Yes. I believe this is 2 on this particular version, but they're all going to be different. So 2, 3, 1 you might need. So to charge this Saber, again, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to make sure you unthread that wire first, and then untwist the handle. Here's where the battery's at. You have this style of charger. Pop the battery out, just like that. Put it in the charger, charge it up. Positive always goes up top here. And there you go. This one you may need to, again, figure out these connectors. Just pop them out a little bit, and there you go. Now, well, let's just move on to the various styles. So there's a different style. There's Obi Wan Episode 1 / Episode 2, and it's got this kind of quick press button, and it's got a USB-C charger right there. The first thing is this has a CoverTech wheel on it, and so you can kind of hang it on your belt, and it looks cool, right? And it's Obi Wan's Episode 1 Saber. It's one of my favorites, actually, because it has kind of nothing in the way of you holding it. You can hold it very comfortably. It's not true for all the Sabers. Although it's not my absolute favorite, you got to say that the Graflex is probably it's just the iconic, you know, original Saber, right? So what I'm trying to say is get the one that you like the best, unless your purpose is really just to learn how to swing it around and use it in combat or whatever. So the D-ring, or sorry, the CoverTech wheel, which acts like a D-ring, that allows you to connect it to your belt. This one might be on there with a smaller, this is a machine screw, a metal screw. It might, your one might be on it with a smaller one, and it might just kind of not even thread in there, and you'd be like, well, this doesn't even work. Sorry about that, first of all. Secondly, in this small bag, there's a longer machine screw. Just grab one of those, and it works perfectly to attach that CoverTech wheel. So, first of all, charging, you just pop the USB-C in there, it'll say charging. If it doesn't, or if there's any weird stuff happening with the Saber, take the CoverTech wheel off, untwist the bottom piece, the whole bottom piece. As you can see, it kind of comes apart in 3 different pieces there. Okay. You're going to take this shroud off. The shroud only comes off with this removed. Then you're going to, it's very similar to the other ones I've shown you. This screw right here is pushing this button charger section forward. This screw is holding the chassis in place. There's nothing else encumbering your ability to pop this chassis out, meaning remove this screw, remove that screw carefully, press this power button and charger port system down, and then pull from here this forward. This piece actually unscrews, and you can see the top emitter piece. It's just kind of a pain to reline it up, so it comes usually perfectly lined up, so I wouldn't mess with that. Pull the chassis out here, again with the chassis out, you've seen in my other demos, to just tap it like this until the battery falls out. That resets the battery, put the battery back in, put the chassis back in, and kind of reverse by lining the button up, the charge port up, put your screw back in here first to push the buttons forward. And I say that specifically because then you can still move the chassis to line these up properly if you need to. Tighten it all the way up, put this one in carefully because again it can strip, and then reassemble everything just like that. And if you're watching this whole video, I bet you can tell that there's a theme here. If anything weird is happening, first, make sure the battery is fully charged. Second, reset the Saber by removing the battery. So that's why I'm showing you all these different models, how to reset the battery on all of them. Because 9 times out of 10, anything weird happening means it's either not fully charged. And I know what you're gonna say, Sean, that's the first thing I did. You already told me to do that. I've already done it. So sorry to say it again, but it still comes up. So make sure that the battery is fully charged, and then reset the Saber by removing the battery, putting the battery back in, okay? These are just versions unto themselves. These are the Ahsoka Sabers that you can buy in a bundle or separately. So the main hilt's very simple to understand how to charge it. It's got the charge port exposed, plug it in, it'll say charging. If it doesn't say charging, here's what to do. Again, you have the screw right there. And sorry, I don't mean to sound like so passé about all of this, but what I'm just trying to say is there's a theme to all of this. And maybe you're just watching this one, so I'll just kind of show you. This uses a smaller Allen key. This one is the only one that uses a smaller Allen key, and it should have come with your Saber. If you had something like this, there's 2 different sizes. And then you should also have a smaller Allen key here, because that's what this one takes. If for some reason you don't have this smaller Allen key, bring this whole setup to your local hardware store, have them help you figure out which Allen key this is, and I'll reimburse you not only for the tool itself, but also for your time. That's the fastest way to get this done. I can also send you a tool. It just typically takes like 1 to 2 weeks. And I'd rather you have a working Saber faster than that. So apologies if that seems, I know you shouldn't have to do that. Trust me. I know that's not the ideal way that this should work. I totally understand, and you've spent good money on these. What I'm looking for is the fastest way to help you and so that you're the happiest with your saber and you can use it quickly, and then I'll compensate for time and cost. Okay, so that's the first part. Again, that one is pushing the battery and the charge port forward, and you need to remove that because you have to push these down in order to get the chassis out. So you're only going to do this if there's something weird happening with the Saber, meaning the power button's not working, it's not turning on. If you plug the Saber in, it doesn't say charging, something like that. So this one's actually very simple. You remove those two screws, the bottom piece here, and that might be on there a little bit tight, but you just screw it off. I know there's a ton of other things that you can remove on this. You don't need to. It's just these two, and push the power button down, and you might need to use a tool to do that. Just be careful when you do it so that it's down like that. And then you're just going to pull it out the bottom. Very simple. Again, this is the version I used to sell. Your electronics might look different. And there you go. Again, pop the battery out. The battery's going to be in there. You're just going to do like that. Battery's going to fall out. You're going to put the battery back in. And again, button top toward where the blade goes. So positive end here, and you can see it on this chassis. Positive here, negative here. The Saber won't work if it's not, if the battery is not in there properly, and you can actually damage the electronics if it's not installed correctly. So again, this one uses the smaller, apologies, I don't know the exact size of this Allen key here. It should come with your Saber. So just make sure everything's all lined up. If you find that this gets hard and it's not fully in yet, make sure this is aligned so that the buttons have space to move up through into the top of the Saber. And again, you can control where these buttons end up, or just tighten it until it stops. There you go. This one you can easily strip out because it's a wood screw, so just be careful when tightening it. This holds your chassis in place so that when you're putting your blade in the top, there you go. So this one, when you feel pressure, just stop. If it's not coming out, it's good enough. It's just so that this part doesn't fly out. And then again, it might take a little pressure. But there you go. So that's how to reset your main Ahsoka hilt. Just real quick, before I forget, let's do a blade demo. This is one of my entry-level Sabers, and it has retention screws here and a retention screw here. You can see I only have one retention screw installed because that's honestly the best way to do it. And in this case, there is one best way to do it, and that's the best way. Usually there's multiple good ways to do it. I say that because if you put both retention screws in here, and you'll see, even on Luke Return of the Jedi, this is the only caveat really, you're going to need at least two. There's space for 4 in there, just because this part is a little bit shallow, and especially if you have a 36-inch blade, you're going to want at least 2 screws in here, but try to make sure that they are 90 degrees to each other, because what you want to do is press the blade against as much metal as possible. So if you have your blade in here, and when you're putting the blade in, by the way, you don't want to twist at all like this. You just want to push straight up and down, because if you twist, what you do is you have the chance to bend the electronics in there. They're just small gold metal pins that transmit electricity and data to your NeoPixel blade. So once it makes contact, you'll feel like you can press it until it stops. It has a bit of a spring to it. So press it down till it stops and then let off a little bit. The reason for that is if you're ever using it to duel, what can happen is if you hit the blade hard enough, it might compress the springs a little bit. If your blade is already fully compressing the springs, you're going to damage the Saber. So the only caveat to the 1 screw rule is really this: Saber or Obi Wan episode 3 or episode 4. Anything that looks like this with a thin neck, use at least 2 screws 90 degrees to each other, and you'll get the best hold on the blade. This one has a super deep blade hold cavity, so to speak, which means it's got a lot of metal to press against. So that same thing, just press down until it stops and then let off a little bit. Hold that in place and then just use one retention screw. And these screws are in this small gray baggie that you have. And then you're just going to tighten it down like that in about a quarter turn past where you start to feel pressure. And that will give you the least amount of wobble in the blade. You can kind of smack it around, right? So this one has, I believe, Golden Harvest in it, so it's got some gesture controls. It does, so that's your twist on.
You'll have to do better.
So you can get Golden Harvest now, by the way. If you need to reset the Saber on this one, super easy. You're just gonna untwist the handle. And you can see the screws that are holding, actually in this case, pulling the power button and the recharge port up. And this is what holds the chassis in place. And on the newer models, you'll see two holes here, one for the chassis, one to push the power button forward. That's the newest design. But again, to reset the Saber, what you're going to do is just untwist the handle and it exposes the battery. This one's pretty tight, so I need to kind of twist off. And again, you're just going to tap, literally tap until the battery pops out, and it's already kind of popping out. There you go. And this is pretty sturdy plastic. The electronics are all pretty sturdy. I wouldn't worry too much about anything bad happening. Don't slam it, right? But you do want to just give it some force until it pops out. So this is the newer style with the kind of button on the bottom. You can't adjust that, but you still can adjust this one with your Allen key if you need to, right? So then you're just going to pop the battery back in. And that, on Golden Harvest, that is, your Saber is awake now. And there's all kinds of settings on Golden Harvest. That's going to be a whole different video for sure. Even on XENOPIXEL and Profi, they all three have their own kind of ways to use them. But for now, this is really just about charging your Saber and resetting your Saber. So let's finish up Ahsoka here. Ahsoka is actually really simple. You just need to take this one out and you need to take the power button off. Power button, real simple. You just twist, untwist on the metal part, meaning the copper part can actually untwist as well. And then what happens is you untwist that little piece there. And if that happens, then your power button gets all weird. So be careful with that. So that's the first part. Then you just want to take this off. It has happened where trying to remove this screw, it's on there fairly tight. It's possible to strip this screw. So just be really careful because it means that you can't actually get your chassis out to recharge it. So power button out, the CoverTech wheel off, and just untwist the bottom here. Recharge, all you have to do is just remove a little bit and you'll see a recharge port. There you go. So if you're just trying to charge the Saber, that's all you need. If you need to reset the Saber, pull it all the way out and pop this battery out like that. Again, always gold pins, button top. Button top goes toward the gold pins. That's all you have to remember. And then pop your chassis back in. This is your activation button, your power button, so just make sure it's lined up with that hole up there. Push it forward. And sometimes it'll have a little friction. So just make sure that battery is in there. Sometimes you need to twist the chassis slightly. Looks like it was just the battery. You don't want to press on the speaker at all, so make sure you're touching just the plastic chassis, and you're going to line that up right there. And then just reverse the order. First, you probably want to put your CoverTech wheel on. And remember, not too much pressure. Taking screws on or off, because typically they're interfacing with some kind of plastic. Yes, ideally that wouldn't be the case. I hear ya, but it just is. Metal chassis are not cheap. Metal chassis sabers are never under $1,000. They're always more than $1,000. All right, so there you go. There you go. Oh, by the way, if you run into any issues with the retention screws on this one, for example, it's not fully exposed where you put those little holes, or the holes for the retention screws. Again, you only need one, and what you'll do is you'll put your tool in here, and then you'll just kind of nudge it around. And if it's a little bit tight, you don't want to force it. But yeah, if you're having any trouble with that, let me know, because it's usually these pieces here that need to be loosened up a little bit so that this piece moves freely. You should be able to do it by hand, just untwisting or twisting it. So it's not typically an issue at all, but definitely don't force that. Okay, so there's your two Ahsokas. All right, Fallen Order, very simple actually. To charge the battery or to reset it, it's the same exact thing. You're just going to twist this handle off, and damaged or undamaged, it acts the exact same way. Twisting off, this is the XENOPIXEL model. You can see the purple board there, that's a little bit larger. This is your battery, and you're just gonna tap down like that. Don't worry about it, it just flexes the chassis a little bit. You're not damaging anything. If you're slamming it, that's an issue. Please don't slam it. If you need to, you can adjust your terminals here. If your Saber is just randomly turning off, the first thing to do is to make sure the battery is charged fully. The second thing to do, on this one it's easy because it happens automatically. You're going to take the battery out and then put it back in to reset the electronics. The third thing would be to try to adjust these terminals with the battery out, of course, and then you're just putting your tool in there and just bending the metal slightly so the battery is held in there more sturdily, because what could be happening is when it gets hit, it's losing contact, or the PCB battery discharge protection is going off. All right, so once it's in there, you just twist the handle back on.
Power on.
All right, and there you go. On this one, your retention screw goes in either there or there. You can do both. I always recommend doing one first because it's going to make the blade sturdy, as sturdy as possible. Princess Leia, same thing as Fallen Order. Literally, you just untwist the handle and it comes off like that. Same thing, pop the battery out. And you do need to use some force, but not too much. You're not trying to damage it, you're just trying to apply some pressure on the back here to pop the battery out. And you'd want to do that to either charge it, and then it goes into the battery there, battery charger rather, and it goes in that orientation. Just follow the plus to plus, minus to minus. Always, by the way, no matter what. So recharging, resetting the Saber if it's acting funny, pop the battery out. If it's still acting funny, take your Allen key and move the terminals closer to each other by just inserting the Allen key in there and applying some pressure to bend the terminal out. So you're making this distance shorter. It applies more pressure to the battery. Pop the battery always in, button top toward the where the blade goes. That means positive, positive. There should always be markings on the chassis to tell you all that stuff. And then you're going to twist the handle back on and you're off to the races. All right, one more to show you for now. This is Master Rey, episode 9. This is going to be to recharge or to reset the Saber. You're going to twist off from here to expose the chassis. And now your battery may be too far in there. If it's acting weird, you're going to pop it out. To reset the Saber or to charge it, always charge it for at least 4 hours first. You're going to have something like this with you. Plug it into a 5-volt 1-amp source. So recharge the battery first, pop it out. You're going to have to anyway to charge it. To reset the Saber second. Third, if it's still acting weird, is to make sure these terminals get bent a little bit closer to each other so that the battery's held in there better. To get the battery out of this one, it can be a bit of a challenge, but again, you're just going to tap the bottom here. If you find that the chassis is too far in this way to safely get the battery out, you're going to remove this piece. It's actually glued on there, and you can safely remove it just by applying some pressure. And then it's going to expose a battery, or a screw rather. You're going to unscrew that one. It's going to release the chassis. Don't pull it out too far because it's still connected in the top there. So just pull it out enough to get the battery exposed. Pop it like that. Pop the battery out. And then you have a lot of space, meaning you can pull this chassis out and stop it as far this way as possible. It's just a retention screw. So that you don't have to every time take this off if you just need to pop the battery out. That should be far enough. That should be enough to tap there, get the battery out. And if it's not, take this part off, and you can double side tape that, or it should just go right back on, no worries. Something I like to do on this model too is wrap this handle part with some fabric, and then it really makes it kind of, I don't know, makes it look more expensive. That's for sure. Honestly, for the price, I think this is one of the better deals that I have anyway. But there are a couple other models. I will have to make videos on those at a different point. At this point, if there's still issues with your Saber, the next thing to do, and I'll have directions for this in the description, is to reset the firmware, or rather the SD card, especially if you're having cracking in the speaker. And it's not actually the speaker 9 times out of 10. Usually it's either battery, meaning a low battery, or the SD card needs to be reformatted. So with your battery out, you can kind of mess around with this. You can even use your Allen key, and with a finger on the other side, you can kind of get your SD card out just like that. Most of the Sabers now come with these little readers, which is perfect. So you just pop the card into the reader, get your files, all of your files off of this. So make a clone of this onto your desktop, reformat this, put the files back onto the SD card, and then kind of reverse the order here. Always with your battery out is when you take the SD card out. Gold side up on this reader here. Pop your SD card back in like that. And there's going to be 3 different ways to do this. Golden Harvest is on the top, and it is actually spring-loaded, so you just press it and it pops out. It's really simple. And then XENOPIXEL is also a little bit different. But just remove the SD card, reformat it. And again, there's going to be a link to how to do that below. The last thing would be, actually, it's a good thing. It's to reformat your, or sorry, not reformat, but update your firmware. It's a very similar process, but just slightly different. You're not reformatting, you're just updating your firmware. Guys, if you have any questions at this point, I recommend the easiest thing to do is just to shoot a quick 5, 10, 15-second video and email it to me at seansolosabers@gmail.com. That will give me all the information I need to know in order to answer your question, or to help you with the process of just getting it fixed. And again, I'm really here for you. I'm sorry this video is so long, but I just want to make sure all your questions are answered. I'm going to be making other videos on how Golden Harvest and how XENOPIXEL work, just so you guys all know how you can play with your Sabers and hopefully answer a bunch of questions. So thank you again for your business. If you need to, shoot a quick video, send it over, seansolosabers@gmail.com, and shoot me a message also, either on my website or on Etsy, and we will go from there. Thanks so much.